We'll just continue on here with part 2. So I was just saying how agriculture is so much a part of what God has for us in his sufficiency. We also teach the people that there's sufficiency in the land that God has given us. In Leviticus 25:23 it says, "The land, moreover, shall not be sold permanently, but the land is mine, for you are but aliens and sojourners with me." When we understand that the earth is the Lord's, and we're here for a brief time, and it's our job to care for whatever piece of creation that God has given us, then we start to see that the land that he's given us is more than enough to care for our needs, but we need to care for it. And when we care for the land that God gives us, it in turn takes care of us. We teach people God's all-sufficiency in seed. Inside of one seed, and if we can remember and imagine that all the seeds that we have now come from the time of creation. And from that time, the seeds had all this genetic information, which is full of genetic variation and variability, which has given us, as people breed plants and select different plants, has given us all the wonderful plants that we have now. We teach people that when they have an open pollinated seed, that is a seed that produces after its own kind, then they have seed for many generations. We don't promote hybrid seed or genetically modified seed because those seeds depend on men and companies to get more seed or to get the next generation of seed. God's plan was that a farmer could plant his seed and harvest food and seed for the next season. And that process could go on, and God's sufficiency, his provision, would be there for the farmers within their own crop. They wouldn't have to look to another company or to another farm or to any other people for their seed, except, of course, in times of drought. So we teach people God's sufficiency in seed. We teach them God's sufficiency in the mulch cover. We tell people that as they farm the way God farms, all of God's creation has some sort of mulch cover. If you go to the forest, there's a leaf litter covering the forest floor. If you go to a grassland, there's dead and decaying grasses lying on the surface of the soil. No soil is ever left open. And this, what we call God's blanket, protects the soil, it adds the fertility, and it adds to biodiversity, and does so many things that once we trust God and we move away from cultivation to doing farming his way, the way he farms in his creation, we see that there's so much of his goodness tied up in following him in the minimal tillage practices where we leave 100% mulch cover on the soil. We also see God's sufficiency expressed in the agricultural or fertility inputs that he has. We don't necessarily tell people that they shouldn't use chemical fertilizers, but we do teach them that they can make wonderful compost and use the farmyard manure, or if they have absolutely no animals to make manure from or compost, they can use anthill soil. Sorry, we'll just keep going. Sorry, I thought it had run out. So even anthill soil, many of you know that anthills in tropical Africa can be, or tropical, any tropical country around the world, there's many anthills and they'll be 5, 10, even 15 feet high. And those anthills have very rich soil. So when we teach the farmers to go cut a piece of that anthill, grind it up or smash it up and put it in the precision hole that they've made, it's normally about 25% more fertile than the surrounding soil. So God has a plan to provide fertilizer even for the poor widow. we find that God is sufficient in terms of the tools that he's provided. I already talked about the hand hoe. And we've also teach people that God is sufficient in the rain that he sends. We're not against irrigation at all, but we do believe when we follow God's ways and the people mulch their land properly, so much more of the rain that we get in Africa can be held on to. And we've seen where local farmers are using local or traditional cultivation methods, just 2 or 3 weeks of sunshine can make their crops dry up. Yet when people are using farming God's way, mulching their land properly, their crops can go for 3 or 4 weeks in the intense tropical sun and still come through with a great yield. Of course, many of the principles that I've talked about apply to agriculture, they apply to Uganda where we work, but God's all-sufficiency, of course, it applies to all of us. Here in the Western world, we are taught to rely on our science, to rely on material goods, to rely on our wisdom. But God takes these things and he, if we're willing to be humbled, he shows us how they all fall short and they cannot provide what we need. They cannot give us that relationship that we need with our Creator. All these are created things. They're good in their own place, but they're not sufficient. God himself is our sufficiency. I know that many of you may see that there's a temptation to just buy more things. You need the latest phone. The newest iPhone is just out. Everyone's got to get rid of their other iPhone and get the new iPhone. So technology has really taken over our lives. It's great, but we can also keep on thinking, well, I'll be okay when I get the next best thing, when I get another big truck, another big combine. Maybe some of you, that's what life's about. But God wants us to be content with what we have and to use all the good things that he's given us for building his kingdom. I just want to leave you with that verse again about God's all-sufficiency. 2 Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things, at all times, you may abound in every good work. I pray that you will look in your own hand and say, what has God given me? It might seem small, it might seem like nothing in the eyes of the world, but when you take whatever little thing that you have, take your humble beginnings, God can take it and use it, not to make you wealthy and famous, but to make you to be a useful tool to do his good work, to make you a fellow heir and a son or a daughter in his kingdom. I pray that this message will inspire you and challenge you to see, who do you depend on? To ask yourself, who do you depend on? Do you really depend on God, or do you depend on the things and the people around you? It's so easy in our culture because we have so many, our life is geared towards being easy, and it's geared towards taking all the bumps out of it. But we know that life still is difficult despite all of our technology, despite of our good healthcare system. And God wants to use those difficulties to point him back, to point us back to himself, and so that we might find that he's sufficient, he is our all in all, and so that we might join him in the work that he has for us here on this earth. God bless you, everyone. We're looking forward to visiting you in the spring. I send greetings from Jane and all the children, and we just thank you for releasing my parents to help us. They've done a great job of helping to care, cook meals, spend time with the kids. We're going to miss them, but we know you also need them there. God bless you.